I think when we begin to lie to ourselves about certain things, we build a society where the truth is blurred and obscured, and progress begins to look impossible for us. And that is what we have today. You see, there are common misconceptions we've been getting over the years on the internet, and I think it is time we start to filter these things and actually study what history is and what history actually tells. When you go online on spaces like X and TikTok and the rest of them, you come across threads and videos that talks about slavery, and the common narrative you always hear is this idea that slavery was introduced to Africa by the white man. um, the white man also introduced Christianity to demonize um, the traditional belief system of Africans and perpetuate mental slavery by colonizing their mind with verses in the Bible. While you hear this narrative and they sound really coherent, they are often not quite cogent. The English big, abi, make a calm down. Even myself, I don't know anything I talk. These stories that I tell you are often half truth and baked with lies behind them. So, what am I trying to say? You see, slavery has always existed in Africa, and this is what they don't tell you. They try to curb the narrative and give you a half picture of what slavery really is. And what happens when you're fed lies and told things that aren't what they actually are? Well, you begin to build a society with or full of defaults. Take, for example, the idea of Christianity they're talking about. Of course, the white man introduced Christianity to West Africa, specifically West Africa to be precise, not East Africa or any other, um, what do you call it, regions close to the Middle East. That's a different topic for another day. Yes, the white man introduced Christianity to West Africa. However, you have to understand something, that Christianity is different from political agenda. But that's not what I want to discuss first. I want to dispel the narrative you've always heard about slavery and that's been developing over the years, that social media seems to peddle and a lot of people subscribe to. You see, like I said earlier, slavery has always existed in Africa. One of the earliest forms of, or one of the earliest chronicles or stories about slavery happened in North Africa, specifically in the Northeast, and it happened in the Bible. The Bible gives a pretty detailed info about slavery before the advent, or before the white man or the Europeans rather could even think of voyaging to West Africa. That's some of the earliest forms of slavery. I want you to understand something about slavery in the past. Slavery is not as we see it today. Yes, slavery is evil across all times. However, prior to the New World, slavery was seen as a form of commerce. It was a trade in the Old World. That's to tell you the mentality the Old World had regarding slavery. They didn't see it as something immoral or something evil that needed to be condemned. But one religion actually condemned it, and I'm going to talk about that in my next video. But I want to give you an understanding of how the Old World saw slavery and dispel the narrative that slavery was brought to Africa by the white man. Now, I've talked about one of the earliest forms of slavery that happened in Northeast Africa, right? Let's come to West Africa, since this is the focal point of people that peddle this idea that slavery was introduced to us by the white man. Which one will I use? You see, there's one famous civilization, one of the earliest forms of civilization in West Africa that not earliest form, sorry. I'll take back that. Christ. Let me take that back. One of the first major empire in West Africa was known as the Ghana Empire or the Wagadu Empire. The Ghana Empire was spearheaded by the Soninke people, and the Ghana Empire consisted majorly and mainly of the Soninke and the Madinka. I think Madinke. I can't pronounce that name, but these were the two major groups that existed in the Ghana Empire. The Ghana Empire had three common trades, and most of the times in the past, before they gained prominence, they acted as middlemen. They traded gold, salts, and slaves. The Ghana Empire, just so you know, began in the 3rd century and it lasted until AD 1235. They traded consistently slaves, gold, and salt. How did they do it? So we already know that 95% of the world was involved in some form of war. It could be petty raids or major conquest. It doesn't matter. The old world was gory, and it consisted of it was made up of this idea, this zeitgeist that constantly compelled them to go out for military campaigns and conquer lands and take the spoils of wars from lands. So that's how the Ghana Empire grew. They initially acted as middlemen that traded slaves from West Africa to North Africa. Then gradually, as they gained military power, they began taking over kingdoms from Mali to Mauritania to parts of Senegal, I think. These people were enslaved and subjected to working for the Ghana Empire. In fact, in a chronicle, I think, or in an account from one of the Islamic scholars that visited the Ghana Empire, I think in AD 899 or 894, I don't remember. He described the king as one of the richest of his time because he had immense amount of wealth. They were known as the center of gold. They traded gold, and over the years, people began growing jealous of the Ghana Empire based on the wealth it had amassed. It consisted of about 200,000 army during its apex, at its peak. And we see one thing that's routed, or one common thread that connects them to the northeastern depiction of slavery. We see that it was a common theme in the old world, and over the years it evolved from just being subjected to labor without pay. It evolved into trade. They saw people as inferior and traded them for money and supplies, whatever they probably want at the time. Another empire that participated in this in West Africa is the Mali Empire. And we all know the Mali Empire from the popular, in fact, one of the wealthiest, according to sources, one of the wealthiest man to ever live, Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa also traded gold, salt, and slaves. Now we are beginning to establish a pattern. I want to make this video as succinct as I can. I want to make it as short as I can because a lot of us these days get very short attention span. We see the same thing in the Ghana Empire, in the Egyptian Empire. We see it in the Ghana Empire. We are seeing it in the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire began in the 11th century, I think, and lasted until 16th century. You can still quote me on that. I'm not quite sure about when it began, but I think it's about AD 1300s. Yeah, in the 1300s, it's sprouted. Now, this didn't just stop there. You might say, okay, this is the Far West and it had nothing to do with slavery that existed in, in present-day Nigeria or the neighboring countries. But that's a big lie, because we are establishing this fact that slavery was a common trade in the old world. Now we move to the early forms of, or the pre-industrial ages. In 1450, I think, yeah, in 1450, the first time the European voyaged to West Africa, and it was the Portuguese. And during that period, they traded about 500 slaves annually. This trade was between them and the Alada Empire or the Alada Kingdom that existed in parts of, I think, Benin. Yeah, parts of Benin today. Subsequently, this trade began to expand, not because the white man orchestrated it, but because it was a common thing. It was what they knew already. It was their life in the old world. And so other kingdoms saw a way to exploit this opportunity and began to make use of it. That is where you see the birth of the Dahomey Empire. The Dahomey Empire was contemporary with kingdoms like the Ile-Ife Empire and the Benin Empire, which began in AD 1180. And you see a common theme across these three kingdoms. They were focused on military campaigns, and they traded slaves for spices and gunpowder and weapons to use in perpetuating their or carrying on with their conquests. I am just giving you a basic or a preface into what the old world looked like. It wasn't fun and it was never pretty. And now we understand that slavery wasn't introduced by the white man. Slavery actually existed long before the white man. And all this I'm saying, you can research them for yourselves. And we have archaeological evidence to prove this. Archaeological evidence and historical evidence. This happened after the death of Christ. And we have papyrus and papers at that time that enabled scholars to document some of these things as they traveled. So we understand now that slavery existed in Africa before the white man. So whatever narrative they come to push to you that the white man introduced slavery to Africa, you should learn how to research them yourselves and come to your own personal conclusion rather than perpetuate these stories without concrete evidence to prove your position. I think when we begin to lie to ourselves about certain things, we build a society where the truth is blurred and obscured, and progress begins to look impossible for us. And that is what we have today with what we see in how people abuse Christianity and the rest of them. It didn't come as a result of we being mentally enslaved. That's asinine. Let me just put it that way. It's asinine, and those are things we need to start correcting for us to see progress in the country. But I'll see you next time, and next time I'll be coming to talk about other things other lies you've been told about slavery and the narratives you've heard about how slavery was introduced by Christians, or how Christianity perpetuated mental slavery into what we see today. Until next time.